Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. I am an attorney and passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our Wall Street Journal bestseller and new book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. How you doing there, Giggle Monster?
I think I deserve a new co-host chair.
You need a new co-host chair?
Yes, I decided I want a more comfortable chair.
I see. We'll have to see what the podcast budget has in store for you.
There's got to be something. Anyway, moving along to today's lovely guest, we have Ian Cohen, CEO and founder of Lokker, dedicated to providing solutions that empower companies to take control of their privacy obligations. Before founding Lokker in 2021, Ian formerly served as CEO for Credit.com and CPO for Experian, where he focused on consumer permission data. Welcome to the show with Giggle Monster and Jody.
Hi, Ian.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Well,
Sorry about your chair. I can't see it, but I imagine I don't see any back to it that doesn't offer you much support. I would suggest getting something that's more appropriate.
He just has the, extra folding chair, whereas I have the really good office chair. After all, we record this in my office space. So I'm the short one and I get the taller office chair. You're taller and get the shorter chair.
This used to be my gym room and it's gone.
Long gone. Bye-bye.
All right. We're here. Back to the show.
Nice to be here.
Absolutely. Well, so Ian, we shared a little bit with your intro of founding Lokker in 21, but we always like to help our audience understand a little bit farther back. So if you can share, how did your career evolve to founding this company today?
Sure. So way back at Credit.com, we figured out something very simple, that if you give a consumer access to their data, one, they like you, which is always a good thing. And two, they generally can make better decisions. So early days, we tapped into the market of consumer permission data. And that's, a very simple business model. You give somebody, you buy data, you give it to the consumer, they own it. And then suddenly, if they're applying for a credit card or a loan or something like that, they convert at 5 or 6 times the rate as a customer that doesn't know their credit score for obvious reasons. So it started there and it emerged into all kinds of other data. So if you unlock data and give it to consumers, what else could they do with it? Could they make smarter decisions? So it was really about breaking up in that black box. And then after Experian, very interesting case there, where they were opening up products that gave them relationships or created relationships with their customers. I started looking at different kinds of privacy models, both direct to consumer and B2B. And over the years, I had tracked obviously Mozilla and the folks over there, the Brave browser, DuckDuckGo. And I still saw the same problems growing with the use of third party and cloud software, which we'll get into. So I just was trying to figure out what would actually work, because the complexity of what's going on the privacy side and the lawsuits, they're very complicated. And I just don't think most consumers have the ability to manage that. I think the burden is falling on the companies, as it probably should. So my thought was, just coming out of my background, was let's create consumer tools. Let's create a consumer marketplace. But all the companies that I saw doing that, own your own data, blockchain services, create your own browser, they're awesome companies. But it seemed to me that the real problem was going to fall on the companies taking responsibility for their own privacy. And so that's why we founded Lokker, to give companies the tools to protect their customers and, by proxy, protect their reputations.
So for those who aren't familiar, can you give us a little glimpse, a little bit more about what Lokker does?
Yeah, sure. We, excuse me, we draw a fence around your website, and we check everybody coming and going, third party, fourth party, fifth party, and we make sure everybody coming in is someone that's supposed to be there, and everything going out is supposed to be going out. So that's in a short, what we do. The problem and our approach to the problem was, if you go to a website like Marriott.com and you go to book a room, you're interacting with Marriott, but as you guys know, in reality, you're also interacting with all the third parties Marriott uses, and all of those third parties, and so on. So you get this exponential growth behind the scenes of people that can listen in to everything you're doing. So the problem that creates is, if you're big enough to not use cloud software, never use a third-party tool, never use Tableau, never use Google Analytics, create your own email service, create your own ad tracking platform. If you can do that the way Google can, if you're big enough, you don't have a problem. You might create problems, but you don't have a liability problem. If you're anybody else and you've got to use all these other off-the-shelf tools, they work at the edge, the client side in the browser. So what that means is there's this invisible field of trackers and advertisers and spammers, and a bunch of good guys too, that are going directly from their company to the customer, not passing through Marriott.com. And I'm using Marriott.com as for illustrative purposes. So we get in the middle of that stream, and we act as the security guard and bouncer. So we either tell you everything that's happening on your site, every third party, what data they're gathering, where in the world they're coming from. Is it bad? Is it good? Is PII leaking off your site? Is there a skimmer? We do all that, and we identify it. The next step is, if you want, we block it. So we actually resolve inside the browser and make sure we're like the JavaScript police, a firewall for the browser.
Very helpful metaphors and analogies. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
So in a recent research project that Lokker conducted, can you share more about how your company collects data to draw its conclusions?
Yep. So when I show people what we do, they ask, how did you get access? And it's always a funny moment, because I have to explain, probably not to the people listening to this podcast, that, oh no, we're just grabbing the data coming out of every browser session and running it through all kinds of tools. But this data is all out there all the time. So we do it through headless Chrome. So we set up browsers in different areas of the world, and we go to the website and we scan it as if we're a user. Obviously, we have an automated way of doing that. And so I can get into what we found out and what we were trying to discover, but the how part was very simple. We have a scanning tool, and what happens behind the scenes is a bit more involved, but we're resolving what customers are really seeing and the data customers are really losing at their endpoint, the browser.
So I imagine that what they're really seeing and what's really leaking is going to surprise some people. So can you share a little bit about what are some of the conclusions that the research has drawn, or what are some examples that have surprised people? What do they not know?
Oh, I think the thing that surprised people was more than 40% of the healthcare companies in the country have not just the Meta pixel on their site, but Snapchat, Facebook, TikTok, and just about everything else. And nobody expected that. And I think people immediately want to find a bad guy, and they turn to the organization. In reality, a lot of these organizations have no idea what's going on behind the scenes on their site. So what surprised us, we knew we were going to find a lot of stuff because we see behind the scenes all the time. So first, what a lot of people, when they first see it, don't understand is the breadth of what happens behind the scenes with trackers. And once you see it, you totally get why all these lawsuits are happening. You get why GDPR is in place, and you sort of get a different sense of outrage, because you're not just sharing with the service you contracted with, but every third party and so forth. So I think what really surprised us, if you just look at the lawsuits, like Meta got sued for grabbing PHI, protected health information. And, I'll say alleged, but, it's there in plain sight. Excuse me. And then the hospitals that they were dropping the pixel on also started getting sued. And these are good hospitals that are in the business of saving lives. And maybe they had an awareness campaign, maybe they had a fundraiser, but at some point they dropped these social media tags on their site, and they just sort of spread like viruses. Okay. Then the next lawsuit that we tracked, and so we launched in July. And then the second we launched, the lawsuit started. And so, I don't like seeing these things happen, but we built the company exactly for this reason, because we saw this coming. I mean, we didn't think it was going to come right at our launch. We weren't that smart. But okay, the second lawsuit was Oracle. So Oracle, it's a big database company, but one of the things they do is they're a registered data broker. And Oracle has 4.5 billion consumer records. And for reference, there's 8 billion people on the planet. So it's a big bunch of data. And so the first lawsuit I mentioned, Meta, was against using HIPAA. It was a HIPAA violation to share the data. And I'll get into the specifics, but then Oracle was a whole different use case. There was so much data there that people were able to use the data as a proxy for sensitive data that customers had opted out of. And I think it kind of gets to the heart of the issue. When you have this much data and people say, I have nothing to hide, and, who cares? And the problem is, and we found this out way back with AOL, that once you have enough data, you can de-anonymize or re-identify anything. And that's exactly what they're getting sued for. Then you had the wiretapping lawsuits against a bunch of companies for using what a lot of people use, these session recording devices that marketers use to track heat maps on their site and user feedback. And it all sounds fine. But at the end of the day, they're violating wiretapping laws. And then the fourth lawsuit was about CPRA, but I'll hold off on that. I think the biggest surprise for me was, and for most people, was that medical data was getting shared with Facebook. And the reason it happens, and it's not difficult, the reason it can happen inadvertently is if I go to a site of a hospital and I type in cancer symptoms, and then I land on a page, find a doctor, request an appointment, and then I look up contraindicated medications. These are all in front of the login, not behind the login. But that data is all getting shared with the social media company, and oftentimes with your social graph. So it's way more problematic than I think people understand. So I'll wrap it up with saying modern day advertising and retargeting meets healthcare, and the two don't mix. Long answer.
I had several agencies who were inquiring about that Metapixel and healthcare related lawsuits. And at the same time, part of the problem was also that you have people who very well might have wanted to just put the pixel on for really good purposes, an awareness campaign, like you just pointed out. The diligence and understanding what's happening and the almost kind of QA process, the quality assurance process of once it's on to understand what else is it picking, was missed. There's a lot of companies, for example, who will do analytics pixels and they'll do a check to make sure personal information is not going over. And in this situation, what was also happening was you'd have my name get sent over. So, right, not even just the trackers trying to connect all of the dots, but actually Jody made this kind of appointment with this kind of doctor at this kind of time. Right. That's a lot of information that isn't part of an awareness campaign.
we actually see it. We can see not only the pixel, we can see what data it's gathering oftentimes because we're running the data through a DLP service. So it's, a lot of people run data loss prevention on their server side. We do it inside each session. And what happens, to your point, was exactly right. The hospital's trying to do the right thing. And a lot of the breaches that have happened are similar, like somebody sponsors a nonprofit marathon, right? And they use a third party. Anyway, in this case, yeah. So specifically what's happening is, one, the word, like if you're searching for diabetes, and I make an appointment, get passed in the URL string so they can see all that. Then you have these form fields that pre-populate with your browser, right? And they're all picked up too. I mean, you can configure your way around this, but you're talking about a humongous job to manually do. So people, I agree that companies oftentimes don't know, most of the time don't know that they're doing this. They're well-intentioned, but they can't see it. I mean, they literally can't see it. It's happening off premises for them.
It's an interesting time that we are in.
Indeed. It's another way of saying know your data.
It is, but it's complex. I think what we're talking about here is we need some tools to be able to scan, because even if you know the data, you don't realize that the form and the fields in the form were getting collected and sent off.
Well, I can tell you, like, when you visualize this for somebody, the problem's kind of overwhelming because you can go to a single page. I'm not going to name the names here, but you can go to a single page of a hospital website that's similar to the one we were just talking about. And if you look at all the third parties, they might have only placed, well, they actually probably placed a lot more third parties in their tag manager than you would have thought. But when you get out to all the people that it shared with you, I'm talking about hundreds, 400 or 500 different third, fourth, fifth parties that are getting the data shared with. And again, it's just cloud software, uses other cloud software, uses other cloud software. So you get an exponential growth. And when you visualize that for somebody, suddenly it makes sense. Then it comes down to, so now what? And I think it really is just a problem of, first of all, if you can't see it, you obviously can't manage it. And it's traditionally, you've been in this business a long time. It's been privacy, the relationship between the chief privacy officer, the GC, and the CISO. There's a lot of space in there where a lot of stuff happens, right? And sometimes it's diffuse about who owns that responsibility, right? And so, I mean, I think the problem's really interesting. And I think the words privacy and privacy controls have been analogous or, synonymous with compliance for a while. But all of the things we're talking about, all of these lawsuits, all the four ones I just named, and you could bring up many more, have nothing to do with cookie consent. Nothing whatsoever to do. And so that's really the point. I think that my big takeaway that I share is these companies are getting sued for really bad things. Most of them didn't know it. Some of them were a little bit arrogant, but most of them didn't know it. And it had absolutely nothing to do with cookie consent. They had their cookie consent policy up. Now the regulations can nudge things in the right direction, but ultimately it's the companies that want to pick up the reins and do better that drives the change, I think.
So what privacy risks are companies failing to address as they deploy new technology that gathers data, as we're talking about?
They're failing to address, so there's a lot of unknown knowns, to go back to that, known unknowns, unknown.
You're not going to go Donald Rumsfeld, are you?
I'm not going to go Donald Rumsfeld, but I can't help cite like a good line. A good line is a good line. The list is so long. The problem is that business as usual just isn't working suddenly. And it's not working because the plaintiff's bar has seen opportunity. So once you crack open the world we're talking about and show it to people, it's a field day for regulators. It's a field day for plaintiff's bar. And you're an attorney, so you can address this better than I can. So on the defensive side, sorry, what's the question again? Let me try this again. I want to give you a shorter answer to it.
No, not at all. Just your thoughts around the kinds of privacy risks that companies are failing to address when they just deploy new technology, be it their website or a new product. It just seems privacy continues to be an afterthought for many of the reasons kind of we're talking about here, where companies just don't know.
It's that they just can't control what's going on between themselves and the browser. They're just not in control of it. And so everything, you're sharing data with a bunch of people. So you have to ask yourself at any given moment, is there any data on this page that the rest of the world shouldn't know about?
I mean, you're basically saying, if I understood you correctly, is if I have a medical condition, say I'm looking up prostate cancer or something like that, and I go to a hospital website, I could start getting ads for prostate care or whatnot because I don't even realize my data was being shared, that I was on the site with some third party who's now targeting ads to get me to buy something related to what I was researching.
Exactly right. That's right. And even if you can say, well, the ad company promises it doesn't, or it suppresses this kind of data, layers of algorithms deep, the data is still out there. And then later you look at, I'm not implying that Oracle's doing this, but you look at a data set that's big enough and a machine learning algorithm, and you just can't, you can't send that data out there and say, oh, we'll figure it out later. So, there's a bunch of stuff. They really need a view into what's happening behind the scenes of their page. So what they have to worry about is that the browser is, for all intents and purposes, a new endpoint. Okay, so people spend all this money on endpoint detection and response and internal privacy and security for their employees. But what's happening on the other side of the equation is the problem. And you can even see in terms of the breaches that have happened and the kinds of incidents, people are targeting that side of the house more than the server side now because it's easy or easier to target.
So to help change and influence company behavior, how do you see the privacy law landscape potentially impacting that change?
Like always, I think California leads the way, for better or worse, they do. And I think CPRA has got a very specific provision about inventorying everything you do. And that's a wake-up call for people. So let me first say, I think once people start getting sued for, hey, wiretapping laws, or you're sharing all my medical data, or you can track my zip code, or you redlining, once you get this kind of stuff going on, it snowballs quickly, as we know, because it's in the popular opinion, people get outraged, and lawyers see an opportunity, and regulators also do, and politicians do, and that's kind of how things change. So the big change I see is that 4 new privacy laws go into effect at the end of the year. And the California law, CPRA, forces companies to inventory everything. So generally speaking, they have a privacy policy. They have some sense of what cookies they're using. But when we go and look at, what cookies are actually loaded into the browser and trackers and give them that full inventory, there's usually can I curse on this podcast?
Might be kind of a curse-free podcast, maybe the PG curse level.
Oh,
censorship.
Shoot.
Censorship. Get her off.
Oh, shoot. So anyway, people are going to look at this and go, holy crap. Could I say, so that's probably my most polite way to say. So you see this, and I think that's the big change. So the big change is, in a nutshell, is suddenly a company says, you got to inventory everything. And when you do that, first they try to figure out how and spend a lot of money doing it. And it's actually very easy to do. And the next one is once they see it, there's a wake-up call. So I think, any company that sees that, then they're suddenly asking a bunch of other questions. So that's what I see as the big difference, just the awareness, the visibility, and it's coming into focus. So the lawsuits, they're going to happen, but a lot of people think it won't happen to me. They're starting with the biggies. It'll work its way down. And the other thing I think that's happening that's just, huge for giant companies is GDPR is getting real teeth, right? Heavy fines every single day. There's a tracker you can log on to. It's called, I think, the GDPR enforcement tracker. And you can log onto the site and just see every single day, multiple people getting fined. And the fines are one thing. The reputation loss is quite another. So I think most companies here that are multinationals have to build a business that complies with California and have to build a business that complies with GDPR. And those two things alone drive a lot of change. even if the laws aren't perfect, or they talk about cookies and people interpret that literally, there's this sea change where suddenly people get a sense of what's going on. And, there's always good actors that step up, or the best actors, the early adopters that step up, and everybody else tends to want to copy them. So I see that change happening very quickly between now and, Q2 of next year, which is 2 quarters after the law goes into effect. So if I give you an inventory of everything, it's kind of like in a full body scan. When they did that, was it in the 80s or 90s? You could get these full body scans. They were horrid, because you would go to the doctor, you'd get a scan, it would come back and tell you anything and everything that could possibly be wrong with you. And so that would make most people freaked out and miserable. So I don't think, full body scans are getting a genetic, cross-section test. There's been a lot of, work about what should you tell people, what shouldn't you tell people. But if you tell me everything that could go wrong in a scan, it's a pretty big wake-up call, and it does not make people happy campers. So then the question of what you do about it comes into play very, very quickly. And once you're asking that question, you're often running to doing the right thing, right? And so I think that these nudges, which is, I think, how regulations are supposed to work, these nudges have this ripple effect that gets magnified. And so what we're seeing is, some of the largest companies are going to do better. And when they do better, they're going to want to tell everybody about how much better they're doing. And when they do that, other people want to copy them because it becomes the standard. And I think what Apple's done, whether it was through self-interest or not, when they set up their private relay, it's great for end users. If you're the company, you can never rely on everybody being on private relay or everybody using a Safari browser. So you have to come up with something that is browser agnostic, system agnostic. And I see a lot of change. I'm very optimistic. I do not see, I don't know how you feel about it, just based on Congress, I do not see the American Data Privacy and Protection Act as passing anytime soon. And even if it did pass, there are real organizations like CISA that have to do their day jobs, regardless of whether there's a new law or not. But I'm not holding my breath on a federal law, even though most companies would prefer it, I think.
We talk about this a lot with a number of different people, and my answer is always, it's a political dart. I think thoughtful legislation is not that particular version. And I think many privacy professionals would say a thoughtful version is still a couple years away, but politics are politics, and either side could throw a dart. You never know. So I don't know. I think we'll have more states. I think in this next legislative session, I think we'll have more states that will be introduced, and we'll probably keep picking some up over time.
We work with some of the AGs, former AGs. I agree. It's a winning political issue, first of all, for both sides. Like, it's one of the few issues you can pick up in privacy, whether the reason is, be fair or get out of my private life, whatever it is, everybody wants it for some reason. It's kind of foundational in the US, and as it should be. So it's a winning political issue, and there ain't many of those these days. So why wouldn't you take it,
Unless it's a political ad being texted to my cell phone, they won't get rid of that.
No, they won't get rid of that. So Ian, with all this information that about how data is used and collected, what is your best privacy or security tip that you might offer your friends when you're gathering together at a party?
Yeah. So, it's hard, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to see something to manage it. But first of all, retire your tags. And when you use the word tags, people use it as a throwaway line. They generally think we're talking about trackers, but all of your third-party JavaScript that you place in your tag manager. One of the biggest problems is people just leave it there, and it ages out. And the company that owned that third party is sold multiple times over. Usually it ends up with one of the biggies. You've got to go in there and garden, do your spring cleaning. Okay. The second one is, when you're putting a third-party tracker on the site, that process of doing that, putting something on your site, it's essentially, you're your customer now has secret shoppers hanging over their shoulders, looking at everything they're looking at, right? You have a bunch of people following them around. And I think that's the way you literally have to think about it. Like, I'm going to go look at diabetes and I have a bunch of people hanging over my shoulder like, hey, have you thought about type 2? Have you thought about type 1? So I think it's have a rigorous process for when you're putting tags on the site. And frankly, there's a few companies that do this, more than a few, but most don't. And what you really need to do is have a real business sponsor who feels a sense of, frankly, like, wow, I could get fired if this goes wrong. The third thing is being able to track the data that they're gathering. And a lot of times it will surprise you because you think, oh my gosh, well, my database is over here and I don't have a form that's visible on the site. It's behind the scenes. But as we just talked about, you do. You have a world of stuff going on in the background. So, and obviously, like, you need a service like Lokker. You just do. You have to be able to see what's going on behind the scenes, inventory it. However you do it. If you want to do it manually, do it manually. Inventory it. And start with a baseline of share nothing and add from there, rather than, hey, we've got this big mess and we're going to try to react to these laws one at a time. So number one, retire your trackers and your tags, all your third-party software. Number two, have a rigorous process to get the stuff on the site in the first place. Take it seriously and make sure there's a relationship between your GC and your CISO. And number three, you've got to see what data is coming and going from the perspective of the end user. All the stuff that's getting everybody in trouble is happening at everybody's endpoint, every browser. So you have to be able to see it from that perspective, or you're missing a large part of the equation.
It's interesting you say that. I recently was talking to a company and we did a very light touch cookie scan, tracker scan, and came across some different trackers that we know are part of the advertising ecosystem. And the company answered, no, we don't do any advertising. We don't do paid advertising. And they had no idea about these different trackers. And it was a very interesting conversation. Needless to say, there'll be some investigation as to where these tags are, what they're doing, what's happening. It was likely maybe one campaign, one time, the tags were left on the site, multiple people in since that activity. And now they have to figure out, well, what is this and why is it here? And what do we do now?
Look, you put, I don't want to, again, implicate anybody on the call specifically because they don't have a chance to defend themselves, but I will anyways. There's a bunch of social media tracking companies that put, the little logos for all social media companies that you can configure and just drop it on your site. And if you look behind the scenes, there's dozens of trackers they're sharing with and triangulating with. So, hey, I just put some social media tags on my site. I'm not advertising. Yeah, but they are, and by proxy, and that's the problem, right? It's that these third parties, as I started with, have other third parties. So that sounds complex, but at the end of the day, when you just see it, it's like, hey, I dropped this little nice thing on my site, and all of a sudden 5 advertisers and the Blue Kai tracker that's a retargeting company is in there. And it's a mess. It's a mess. And if all those trackers were people standing around you, I think you'd get the idea. If you had a bunch of paparazzi, if you had 400 paparazzi around you rather than a bunch of dots on a screen, that's what it is.
We say that all the time.
What's that?
We say that all the time when we often do presentations. I'll say, imagine you have someone behind you stalking and tracking every single thing. We kind of do a day in the life. You probably would turn around and question, why is this person following you, and notating every single thing you've ever done. And that's what we do in the digital space.
So I love that analogy because it just really drives it home. Like somebody shopping on a street corner with just a crowd of people following them around, taking notes. And, and I think then blocking it. So I won't get into, what exactly how we do it, but blocking this stuff. So drawing a fence around the site and starting with a clean baseline, because what you're all really trying to do is start with a clean baseline. Say, hey, I want all these services on my site. I want to have a modern site that runs fast and has the newest and best services for my customers. And so you're using a lot of tools to do that. And those tools introduce everything we're talking about. So what do you do about that? How do you draw a fence around your site and just create a clean baseline so I can say, hey, look, I share this data with Visa. and I don't want anybody else near that data. Whether you're talking about really serious stuff like skimmer attacks, mage card attacks, or if you're just talking about the more commonplace occurrences of why is the data, when you go to a lot of these sites, why is the data going to 9, 10, 14 different countries? You know, you just need to start with that clean baseline. That's the goal. So I probably should have started there. And how do you get to that goal? Well, you do your spring clean and all the stuff we talked about, but it really is about just getting a clean baseline. And from there, you know, for newer companies, it's easier. So if you're starting a company, you're in an awesome position to not crowd up your site with a bunch of junk. If you're an existing company, it's harder, but it's doable.
So when you're not helping companies put a fence around their website and learn all this stuff, what do you like to do for fun?
Travel. I've been on the road for the last week, but it was mostly for work. I love traveling. My wife is from the UK, so we travel in, you know, Europe and the UK a lot. We actually have an office in Dublin, small one, but it gives me a really good excuse to go over there. I did surfing for a while. I'm from New York City, but I took up surfing when I got out here to try to be more California-like. I'm awful at it, but I love it. Jet skiing, anything on the water is great. I'm way too old, but I decided to take up rock climbing in the gym, so I'm doing that. And you know, writing. I also like to write articles and publish those. So I just love getting around. I love talking to people, meeting new cultures. You know, we went to Mauritius, the island of Mauritius, off, you know, the east coast of Africa a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, you know, it's a good life. And during COVID, we live up here in Northern California. When there are not giant fires threatening to burn down our house, it's beautiful. And, you know, we live in a very nice part of the country. So we also get out and do a lot of hiking and yeah.
One of your favorite activities, hiking in the outdoors.
Yes.
Ian, where can people go to learn more about you and Lokker?
Sure. Well, to get the study I just talked about, just go to lokker.com, LOKKER.com. And we called it a research paper. We were told, don't call it a white paper. Nobody will read it. Call it a research study. So it's a research study, but everything you just talked about, I think it's a quick visual guide to what's going on. And from there, the narrative is all kind of spelled out in that research study. But go to lokker.com, watch the videos. And we've done a couple articles recently for an Information Week in Forbes. You can check those out too, but or reach out to me.
Excellent. Well, Ian, thank you so much for sharing all of this great information. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to meet you guys. And, you know, get a better chair. I have some recommendations. Reach out to me later. And good to meet you guys. Thank you very much.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.